Yoshi-P here did 36 one-hour interviews, many of them more generous than that, along with multiple live streams that led up to these announcements. This was a media embargo as well, so they managed to do 32 interviews, keep them secret, and then release them all at the same time to make a very big community feel.
Greetings and welcome back. This is Nexus Gaming News, recorded on Tuesday, October 19th. I'm Garrett Weinzierl, here as always with Kyle Ferguson. Today, we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy again, because Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker is just over a month away at the time of recording this. And lead developer, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Naoki Yoshida, aka Yoshi-P, just completed an absolute slew of influencer and press interviews. Kyle, Final Fantasy XIV fans are, they're buzzing with all of this new info that's coming out of these interviews. But what I find interesting is it's having a wider impact on just MMO fans as a whole. This seems to be causing all kinds of ripples.
It was very different from how we've consumed our developers in the past. Yoshi-P here did 36 one-hour interviews, many of them more generous than that, along with multiple live streams that led up to these announcements. This was a media embargo as well, so they managed to do 32 interviews, keep them secret, and then release them all at the same time to make a very big community feel. And this happened at the end of last week. Yoshi-P put a lot of passion into these. There was clearly, if not him doing the research, a team in the background making sure that he was aware of who he was being interviewed by. He would compliment their streams. He would talk about their personal lives in some ways. He was relating directly to the players and saying how much he enjoyed their content. There was also no signatures needed, no approval of questions needed. If you were performing one of these interviews, you just showed up and asked what you wanted.
Boy, that sounds nice.
A little different than what we've come to know.
Yeah. So we're coming to this, I think both of us are coming to this from pretty unique angles. Obviously you and I are coming to this from covering Blizzard games, but also you're nearing the end of your first leveling experience with Final Fantasy XIV, and it has yet to hook me. I'm not really into it, but even I have to say, these interviews are just wildly fascinating. Final Fantasy XIV and Yoshi-P, they're clearly nailing the community fostering aspect of things here. And it's it's definitely something WoW's been struggling with, at least in recent years. And, for us coming from the, Blizzard side of things, I've kind of experienced both. I don't think I've ever experienced anything quite as open as what you just described, as showing up to a dev interview and just being yeah, that's it. You just show up. There's been a couple things that were unscripted. The closest thing I've experienced to it was having I would call it the Gen 1 Hearthstone devs just crash a podcast at BlizzCon. That obviously, by virtue of it being unplanned, was pretty much this. It was pretty much open access, but any other interview that I knew I was going to have for really anything Blizzard related had to have questions vetted ahead of time.
And these are basically uncut interviews that are being posted too. And we know from many of those experiences that there is a PR person in the room to stop you from asking anything you shouldn't. If you're not a Final Fantasy fan, there are general MMO questions asked here, and his philosophies are fascinating. If you're not an MMO fan, you should just go enjoy this for the translator, who does an amazing job communicating the English questions back in Japanese to Yoshi-P and then translating his emotion directly back. It really is a seamless experience, and it's just fascinating and cool to watch in that way.
Yeah. I mean, you're showing the Asmongold interview right now. That was Aimi, I believe is the how you pronounce her name. Just incredible. What a great translator.
Well, and very aware of the game and able to communicate the player's wishes, understanding the in-game terminology. Just a very cool thing in general. But there were conversations had in these about MMOs in the first place. And in a world where we are now missing individuals like Chris Metzen, Yoshi-P has elevated to that hero status for many.
Yeah. And that's like kind of like where I want to like sidebar real quick and just say, like, as someone who's not playing Final Fantasy 14, I think if you're an MMO fan, you should still check out these interviews, because they, like I mentioned earlier, like they get really meta about the state of the overall MMO landscape. And I don't know, like, you really talked me into this. You were like, no, go watch his interviews. Like, I know you're not playing. I know you're not, like, you sold me. You got me to go watch this Asmongold interview. And I'm just, I don't know, I guess I'm just surprised. Like, I'm used to a rigidity from developer interviews. Most of the time, like I said, I've had exceptions for sure, and it very much kind of depends on the game. But when we're talking about MMOs, I come from World of Warcraft. There's especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of rigidity there in how the dev interviews play out, and kind of how that back and forth is with creators of World of Warcraft. And I'm more talking like very specifically like the kind of the developer side of things. I think WoW's pretty good about having an open line of communication back and forth between like the cinematics team and the writing team, like folks like Taryn Gregory and Chrissy Golden. They're pretty darn open on social media and kind of down to talk about most subjects. But the developer team, you know, again, kind of talking about our history, Kyle, like we started with StarCraft 2. WoW reminds me of that. Like, we kind of made jokes about they would come out on a tower and kind of make proclamations and then retreat. And kind of, we wouldn't really have much of a line of communication if you weren't like, at least in the StarCraft days, like a top tier competitor. Like, there wasn't much in the realm of conversation with the everyday player at home.
There was almost a fear at work there, as well as a authority they had to place upon themselves to make sure they didn't receive backlash, or that we wouldn't backtalk them because we didn't truly understand the game. That's extremely different when we look at Yoshi-P's philosophy here. He calls himself a game-loving old man, and the personal touches he brought, I mean, I was showing there him crying on stage because of the memory of the original Final Fantasy, which flopped. They shut down that server. They blew up their world in a cinematic event that players were logged in for, and then closed it off until they could fix the thing. It's a crazy story that this late into the game, now approaching its expansion Endwalker, it's having such a huge influx of people, and to them, a resurgence.
Yeah, and that kind of permeated the interviews, and like, again, that kind of overarching MMO conversation that I keep mentioning. Like, that's where I find it interesting. Like, I'm surprised how engaged I was watching these interviews about a game I don't play. Like, Yoshi-P touches, like, he clearly, I don't know, he wasn't afraid to talk about really anything. Like, I'm not used to watching dev interviews and have them kind of comment on the state of the industry as a whole and talk about other games and what they're doing right and what they're maybe not doing so right. And like, some of the stuff, like, I would even straight up say, like, there were some shots fired by Yoshi-P, while at the same time, like, I don't know, he was also admitting like where they came from and like kind of knowing their roots. Like, there are definitely some shots fired at World of Warcraft, while at the same time like admitting like World of Warcraft was a major influence on where kind of A Realm Reborn is now.
And he straight up cosplays when they announce new classes. Every time an expansion has come out, he's dressed up as one of the new classes that might be released. He is a huge nerd in the full sense of the word. But let's talk a little bit about some of these, you know, general MMOisms that he had to say, because they are quite on point, and they are, of course, things that a lot of us do want to hear during this day and age.
Are you talking about what specifically? Because they like got into devs versus the players. What was it? Zelpa HQ specifically brought up the thing you do, but you don't. Like, what one do you want to zero in on?
I think the one that had one of the largest reaches is the "I don't think these developers play their own games" moment.
Yeah, that was in the Asmongold interview. That to one like struck me as, oh, okay, yeah, shots fired. Like, there's no way to. I don't think there's any other way to take that. So like, that was the closest thing I think I would categorize as borderline hyperbolic. Because like, he didn't name any names, but it sure seems like a shot fired over at World of Warcraft. And it's like, I don't know. I'm pretty sure they play their own damn game. Like.
Absolutely. And this was, the quote was, "I've heard my friends talk, and this is, I feel this sometimes too with some MMOs. They wonder, do these developers even play their own game?" Now, of course, they're talking from a place where they play their own game so much, they're so invested in their own game so much, that it can feel like that. I think it's a fascinating statement to make when it is such a popular feeling. However, he has gone on record multiple times to talk about how he hates the division between video games in general. He wants you to have a healthy video game diet. You should play Final Fantasy to the point you're happy, and then go play something else because you're done. And then you'll come back enriched from those experiences, in his own, pseudo words, paraphrasing here, and enjoy Final Fantasy more, having taken a break from it. And that's,
and he kind of tied that in too about the more kind of open systems of Final Fantasy versus something like World of Warcraft, at least modern World of Warcraft, right? And that was what I think he even said, like, yeah, go play World of Warcraft when the new patch comes out. When you're bored with that, come back to Final Fantasy. Like, I'm paraphrasing here, but I don't know. I'm not used to hearing devs kind of talk like that. And really, at the end of the day, I think it kind of like, this is kind of how I'm walking away from these Yoshi interviews, is like, Yoshi-P really comes off as a MMO fan. As just kind of a fan of the genre and most of the major players in the space. Yeah, it's refreshing, I guess, is how I would put it.
There's something the Final Fantasy community loves to bring up, and that is Yoshi-P says himself that Final Fantasy XIV would not exist without World of Warcraft, without his love of other MMOs. However, when it was being redesigned and they pulled that influence from World of Warcraft that he talks about, people like to point out that this was the time period of Wrath of the Lich King, right before Cataclysm. And for many, that's where the decline of World of Warcraft began. So when Yoshi-P says he was influenced by World of Warcraft, many people like to believe that it was the World of Warcraft that they loved the most, and that Final Fantasy is a continuation of those philosophies.
I guess I can see that. Speaking pretty generally, right? Because Legion was a big hit. Like, Legion's pretty loved. And yeah, so like, and for me, like, I also really liked Pandaria. But that sure makes a lot of sense, because yeah, you corner me at a BlizzCon bar and go, "What's your favorite WoW expansion?" I just go, "Wrath of the Lich King." Take another sip of my beer. So like, yeah, speaking generally, I definitely I can see that through line in a major way. And so yeah, it's like, I'm really looking at this through the lens of like, what is Final Fantasy doing right that other MMOs, and for me, it's definitely coming from a what is that Final Fantasy doing right that World of Warcraft isn't, and they just, the communication here, and the language used, it's really just hitting home, and it just feels, it comes back down to how not regimented it is. It really does come off as authentic, even though I look at Yoshi-P and I do see like someone who is clearly masterfully PR trained.
Oh yeah, absolutely like, performing.
Yeah, there's no gaffes, like there's no misspeaking, like I like, and even when, like I say, like him mentioning that that quote, that do they even play their own games, like that feels like a shot fired. But even when kind of the doors left open to take other shots, like again, I mentioned the Zelpa HQ interview when she mentioned the J. Allen Brack, "You think you want it, but you don't" line. there's somewhere where like I watched the Asmongold interview and I went into the Zelpa interview and so I was kind of expecting like, oh, here comes another jab. A jab. Didn't mean to make a joke there. And he didn't take it. He kind of gave like a really like, it seemed like an understanding from the point of view of a developer. Like, yeah, like he kind of got into it and saying like, sometimes your players want to change that you don't agree with. And he made a big relationship analogy, which I actually thought was pretty kind of adorable. But it was much more, I think, understanding from a developer point of view. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just I came out of the interviews that I watched to kind of just get an idea of why this was making such a splash, feeling like, yeah, I think a lot of people are watching this and they're just feeling like it's kind of an authentic window into Yoshi-P's mind as both a player of MMOs and a creator of MMOs. These don't, even though they clearly are, this is like, by sheer the volume of how many interviews he put out, this is a press junket at the end of the day. 100%. This is a plan. This is a piece of marketing for a massively successful video game. But it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like this stiff, regimented, questions were vetted and approved ahead of time type of thing. Like, this plays to the media we're used to as gamers consuming, which is like hanging out with our favorite streamers or the our favorite YouTuber or what have you, your favorite creator, who it's less polished. It's more kind of open and in a way kind of plays off sincerity, even if sometimes it's maybe more planned than we realized.
Absolutely. However, when he took over the Realm Reborn to make Final Fantasy great, he immediately went to the producers, all the developers. He asked, what do you want to make in a game? But in particular, he made it extremely clear that the only way this was going to work was if we had open communication. And when you bring up that you think you do, but you don't moment, to him, that was a fundamental breakdown of trust. It was the developer saying, you don't know what you want, but also we're hiding something. And they were, frankly. We found out much later on in Legion that they simply did not have the code anymore, and they had to find it to make WoW Classic again. And eventually they found those files and were able to recreate, in a sense, that environment sitting on top of Legion.
Yeah, and it's something that he got into in that Zelpa interview, saying that, if you are in that position as a developer, and there is actually like, and I don't know, like, right, like this makes a bit of a leap, right? Like, who knows what was going through Jalen Brack's head? Maybe Jalen Brack was intentionally covering up, or maybe he was just annoyed with the endless cavalcade of requests for Classic WoW, and maybe it was just a moment of just personal backlash. Who knows, right? But what Yoshi-P gets into is saying that, like, if there's another reason, if there's a reason you can't do it, if there is a limitation, just own up to it. Just be transparent about it. So this is, again, speaking generally, right? Like, we cover Heroes of the Storm weekly on another program, which is a much smaller Blizzard game. And the team over there are really open about informing us, like, what's possible and what isn't. They're very good, I feel, about setting expectations, and it's something that I don't feel the World of Warcraft team has been very good at. So, like, even within Blizzard itself, I think there's different styles of communication, and there's some that I think resonate with the community significantly better than others. Heroes of the Storm and Hearthstone come to mind. And Hearthstone's gone through different ups and downs. They've definitely gone through periods of being more open and then kind of closing back off. And right now, I think they're very open again. I think they do a lot of communication with the community. Although at the moment, I think it's a little quieter again because we just lost one of the main players in kind of being chatty with the community with Alec Dawson moving to a different team within Blizzard. But that's getting lost in the weeds.
But what you're showing there is that it often takes a great individual, or at least a forward individual, to do these things, like Ben Brode, like Chris Metzen, who break out of their immediate hard role and say, I'm willing to take on community pressure of that level. And I'm willing to be a face that can be blamed or celebrated when things go well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the double-edged sword of being that public figure, right? I think regardless of what type of public figure you are, if you decide to, take up that mantle of being the public face for a game, yeah, you're going to get the praise when things are going well, and you're going to catch the flack when things are not. I think in the case of someone like Jalen Brack, I think, the certain comments kind of brought it on for sure. I'm trying to sound impartial. The Jalen Brack made me very angry many times, but yeah, clearly I'm failing to sound impartial.
This is a lot of people are very cautious. Naturally, they're seeing Yoshi-P for the first time. A lot of players are experiencing him through these interviews for the first time.
Oh, yeah. I had seen a few screen caps of his cosplay before, and that was it. That was all I knew until you and anyone watching or listening on what Kyle really had to convince me on this one. I was like, oh, man, I don't play the game. I don't want to watch these interviews.
I'm cautious too. We all just got hurt by a lot of heroes, and here comes another person who's being revered, and we're going, I don't know if I'm ready to really get behind another developer, but these were really fascinating ideas.
Dude, yeah. If you're a Blizzard fan right now, I think it's really hard to want to be a fan of a named developer again, because clearly with other much bigger issues with Blizzard as a whole from a corporate standpoint, I'm afraid to trust again, but.
And I'm not here to necessarily sell anybody on Final Fantasy. I do think it's fascinating that they've surpassed 24 million players. It is now the most successful Final Fantasy game of all time. And it is older, much like Wrath of the Lich King would be or Cataclysm would be. I have just finished A Realm Reborn. It's, people like to say, a slog. I feel like I was introduced to a lot of characters who are going to become very important and are going to matter to me a lot over a very long time period. But there are fundamentals that I really, really enjoy about it. For instance, one that just strikes me as huge is the characters know my name. How many times have you walked up to Thrall, Jaina, Sylvanas, any of them, and they call you Voidwalker, or they call you Hero, and you're like, you
champion.
I've saved the world how many times? You don't know my name? How could you not know who I am? Like the mere act that when two characters interact with each other, and on the way out, one of them says, oh, hey, and then leaves, you go, oh, right, I know you. And you acknowledge my existence.
It all plays out in text, though, right? So it's way easier to pull off.
In some ways, yes, it is kind of a text adventure at this phase. However, going forward, I've heard the voice acting improves dramatically as they get way better actors, but also in abundance. It becomes more and more until you're eventually watching more of a anime, really, or a cartoon featuring your character standing in for the main character's part. I would say right now, to compare it, it's kind of a okay Dragon Age. There's a story. The ending came too quick for A Realm Reborn for me. I was suddenly fighting the final bad guy, and I wasn't really sure why. But the pieces are all in place for a great game.
Well, maybe one day it'll wear me down. Again, if you're not playing this, if you're coming to it from my perspective and just wondering, why is there so much noise and so much hype around the lead up to this and around these Yoshi-P interviews, I really do think that if you're just in general interested in MMOs, that space and that genre of game, that there's a lot of things that are really interesting here to kind of see, how to communicate with your community effectively. There's a lot of good lessons to be learned here. So it brings us to the end of this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, and you'll get the latest uploads from Kyle and me. We upload every Tuesday. Also, for our podcast listeners, don't forget to subscribe if you're streaming the podcast version. I know you can do that now, but please subscribe. It helps us both on YouTube and in podcast form. If you want to write in, you can send your emails to feedback@nexusgamingnews.com. Other than that, you can reach me directly on Twitter @GarrettArt, and Kyle is @Kyle Ferguson, 2 S's in Ferguson. Until next time, though, good luck and have fun.